Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. I'm down here just beneath this magnificent monument, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and just opposite the wonderful Opera House, about to witness a sunrise on this wonderful spring morning. It's Tuesday, the third day of the week, the second day of the work week, and I thought that I would do what I normally do with Jim's 5am Club and deliver yet another book summary. So the book summary that we're going to go through today is a book that is entitled David and Goliath, by an author known as Malcolm Gladwell. Anyway, let's see where this book will lead us, and we'll have the backdrop here of the Opera House, and hopefully a beautiful sunrise coming up over the next 10 or so minutes. So for those of us who are Christian or have followed the learnings and teachings of the Old Testament, you will know that there is a biblical event known as the battle between David and Goliath. And Goliath was a warrior, an athlete, a warrior, a massive soldier who was part of an army known as the Philistines or Philistines. And David was the son of King Solomon, who was the son of King Saul. And he was a much smaller opponent, but had something much more important to fight for. And of course, in the ensuing battle, David used a technology, a sling, where he was able to sling rocks, and one of those rocks struck the unbeatable foe on the head and felled him and killed him, making David the unbelievable winner of that engagement, the improbable hero who went on to go on to bigger and better things. So what can we learn from this book? We'll just step through it and see what we can identify. But the author here talks about the importance of having courage, even in circumstances where it looks as if you don't really have a chance. I know that in my Greek history, there are numerous events, numerous times where the Greeks were outnumbered by their opponents. They were outnumbered by the Persians, for example. They were outnumbered by the Italians in World War II. There are many, many examples where they were outnumbered, and yet their focused efforts were sufficient for them to lift in battle and to generate an outcome that defined not only Greece's history, but also the history of Western civilization and the nations that uphold and respect democracy. So according to this author, courage is what you earn when you've been through the tough times and you actually discover that they're not all that tough after all. a powerful message that once we've been through those tough times, you actually realise that we have more than enough capability and capacity to deal with those tough times and to, grow and develop to be able to handle not only those apparently tough times or relatively tough times at the time, but to be able to handle tougher situations later on in life. That's why it's important, where possible, to never ever give up, because you never know what your fate is going to be, and it's always better to be fighting for a strong why rather than just being part of an army or being part of a groupthink that doesn't really know exactly why they are doing what they're doing, and they can quickly fold once they come in contact with a worthy and a focused and a purposeful opponent. So the author goes on to tell us here that living in a privileged environment could actually be doing us harm and may hinder people's success. Growing up in a privileged environment could actually be a disadvantage, is one of the key messages which is coming from this book. Because growing up in privilege may mean that we grow up fat, dumb and lazy and not hungry for success and without worthy goals, without a thirst for doing more with our lives. So something to consider. So the author here reminds us and says that the bottom line is that growing up with rich parents in many ways makes people weaker, not stronger. Because if you grow up in an environment where you haven't been pushed, where you haven't been tested, you will never ever know what it's like to be hungry, physically, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. So what we're saying here is that sometimes it's much better to be pushed in life, and if you take it easy, you're basically doing it at your peril, not to your advantage. So the call to action from this author is to basically embrace, to welcome a tough life, because that tough life will make you tougher, will make you better in the long run, will help you focus, will help you appreciate the good times when they come, and will also teach you that you're more than capable enough to get through those tough times, and also realise that those tough times weren't as tough as what you feared in the first place. Because at the end of the line, at the end of the day, one of the great lessons that we learn in life is that most people live in fear, and a lot of those fears are irrational fears, most of which will never ever eventuate. We overestimate, we overcalibrate what the negative outcomes may be. Now, it's important to think about the first, second and third level consequences, but to be realistic in what those consequences are and can be. But as we say, most people tend to overestimate the first, second and third level consequences, which sometimes stops them in their tracks and ceases them from trying and from continuing and from engaging. So by all means, consider the first, second and third level consequences, but understand that the fears that they generate may not necessarily, or may never necessarily, ever eventuate. The second key point to come from this author is that if you have a learning disability or any disability in your life, it might actually give you an advantage in the long term, because disadvantages like learning disabilities help us develop our skills in other areas. You learn to overcompensate and to learn to cooperate and collaborate your senses to be able to achieve, maybe not as quickly as other people, but in the long term you will be much stronger and better than the others, because you will have focused more intently and learned things potentially deeper and much better than the others. So it's important to understand that we should never underestimate the people around us, our opponents, because as they used to say in the old days, winners are grinners and losers are contemplators. They sit down, they think, they accept their loss on the chin, but they do something about it. Whereas the winner will just live with the attitude that they are deserving, and that they don't really need to do very much more, because they are just so much better than everybody else. The author here goes on to say that the ones with the learning disabilities, or the ones who are struggling, are the ones who are going to sometimes read slower and be more focused in their reading. And the intent of that, or the outcome of that, or the byproduct of that, is that they're actually thinking longer and better, and are also questioning things in a more productive way to help them use that as an opportunity for them to be better, stronger, and to be able to leverage it as a skill later in their lives. And the last point that comes from this author is where he says that we need to use our own unique skill set to beat bigger competitors on our own terms. Remembering that the skills that we have, if we focus them, if we complement them with other skills that we have, if we leverage those skills, it can make us stronger than we actually think. Just like with David, he was much smaller than Goliath. He was never going to match Goliath one-on-one in a fisticuffs or a one-on-one battle. But Goliath was able to use his brain, his mind. He was able to strategize. He was able to use technology to narrow that gap, to reduce the disadvantage, and to make him a worthy opponent, not only to enable him to defeat Goliath, but to go on and become a great leader of the Jewish nation, of which Jesus, of which Mary were products of. So the author here says that we must learn to use our own skill set and be able to use it in a way to complement it and to collaborate it with other skills, and with the right timing to make the most of the opportunities that present themselves to us in our lives. I remember years ago hearing of a basketball coach who once said that society won't judge you based on what you achieve, but what you should have achieved given the skills, the opportunities, the network, the investment that your parents put in your education, the things that you should have achieved. So we mustn't waste opportunities in our lives, and we must always be looking for how can we make the best use of the resources that we have. How can we team up with the right people, with the right mindsets to help us all benefit in the long term? Because being an underdog, according to this author, can be an advantage. You have less pressure on you. We've got Parramatta going into the grand final with Penrith, and Penrith are the big favourites. Nobody expects Parramatta to win the grand final. Nobody expects Parramatta to be even competitive in the grand final. But with that thought process comes the pressure for the Penrith team. And Parramatta have got basically nothing to lose and everything to gain. So they'll be going in there knowing that they can use their guerrilla tactics, they can use their underdog mindset to help them benefit them during this grand final match. So what the author is saying here is that if you're an underdog and if you use guerrilla tactics, if you think about what you're going to do and you're operating on adrenaline, and you're basically trying to make every post the winner, you will win more than you lose. According to statistics, you will win 63% of the time. Don't ask me how they came up with that, but what we're saying here is that if you've got nothing to lose and you're the underdog and you don't have the pressure on you, there is a big chance that you can create an upset. Whereas if you're the underdog and you go head to head with your opponent, you step up and go face to face, you will lose 29%, you will only win 29% of the time. You will lose 71% of those engagements. So remembering, being an underdog is a disadvantage, but it's only a disadvantage if you don't use guerrilla tactics, if you don't use it to your advantage. So who knows what's going to happen on the weekend, but I'm going to the grand final with my family, and we're just going to go, hopefully, to enjoy a great match. The last thing I want to do, of course, is go to a grand final and see my team completely outclassed. But who knows? We'll wait and see. So the key point that the author makes here about being an underdog is that you should be focusing on outsmarting your opponent with your own individual strengths. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Jim's 5am Club on this magnificent Sydney spring day. It's a glorious sunset, as you can see. There's hardly anybody about. What amazes me in this tremendous city that we live in is that we have so many beautiful mornings that greet us every single day, and yet there is hardly anyone here. So my encouragement is, my call to action to each and every one of us is to get up early in the morning, come down to the city. If you start working at 8, come down to the city at 5. Come down and enjoy this magnificent, this awesome view that is presented virtually every morning, and make the most of it at the end of the day. So wishing everybody a fantastic Tuesday, and I look forward to coming to you again from a different place with a different message of empowerment. where we can go through and learn and leverage from OPE, other people's experiences, and see where it leads us, see what we can learn, see how we can use it to improve not only our lives, but the lives of those around us. Yasas, take care and make the most of all the opportunities that present themselves to us on this beautiful, most beautiful Sydney spring day. Yasas, and bye for now.